Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon and continuing our discussion on censorship, since it's still a big issue going on right now. A few housekeeping tips before we get started. I wanted to remind everybody that we have our second Explorers group, or Explore the Questions That Matter group, on Thursday, right? Thursday, April 21st. It will be at the Lincoln Elementary School in Lincoln, Kansas. I hope you guys can make it. We will have pizza and cookies and probably water and tea. And we will be discussing what's important to you, but also get a chance to explore the Lincoln Elementary Library. The last one was a big hit. It was a small group, but they got to really talk about the things that were important to them and share their ideas. So I'm hoping that if you're available and curious, that you'll be able to join us. We will have several Explorers groups throughout the year. The next one, I believe, is
in Kerwin
on May 10th. Right. And then in June, we have it in Glen Elder. And then we're going to take a break over the summer, and then we'll have a couple more in the fall. So, put it on your calendar. Okay.
We have one person calling in on the phone. If you can unmute yourself and say who you are, we want to make sure you get credit for attending today.
Yes, thank you. We also have upcoming, we have, Spring Fling. That's the big one. We have the full system annual board meeting. If you know your system plan, you know that's standard number one is that your voting representative for your library must attend a full system board meeting. There are two actually this year, and the standard is just stating for one. So that means that there's a little bit of
leeway
there. If you can't make May 25th, then put on your calendar September 7th. May 25th is in person only, and then the September 7th, which is our budget hearing and revenue neutral rate hearing as well. That is September 7th, and that is all online. And I think our phone person was trying to talk, and I was talking over them. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to tell us who you are, and then we'll get going.
Anita Butler, USD 395 Lacrosse.
All right, thank
Excellent.
you, Anita.
Hi, Anita. Excellent.
Okay.
Mary Beth, before we get started, I have a disclaimer.
Okay.
When we talk about censorship, we are passionate, and it can sound, a little bit animated, I'll say, to be nice to us. One of the things, if you've attended trustee training or you've ever watched us do anything, we've always said, we're not the library police, we're your library friend. And I don't want anyone to feel intimidated by our enthusiasm for the topic. And I absolutely don't want anyone to think that we are perfect, because we have all walked in your shoes and we have made decisions then. I'll speak for myself. I've made decisions that I wouldn't make now because I know better, things like that. We're not judging you, especially with this one where we talk about self-censorship. There's no judgment. This is all done in love and under a spirit of providing information and fostering discussion. And if anybody would like to have a private discussion on this topic away from this meeting, Patty and Mary Beth and I will absolutely make ourselves available to you for that. There are points during this meeting where we're probably all going to raise our hands because we've been there and we've done that. So just remember, we're not judging. I don't mean to sound intimidating in any way to anyone throughout this whole meeting. I know I can come across that way sometimes. That's not my intent. Again, this is done in love to foster education and friendly discussion.
And just to add to that, one thing, one of our goals for this presentation is just kind of help you critically look at what you're doing. And so if there's something that you weren't sure, is this really censorship, or weren't aware of, now, you can look at it in a different way and decide what's best for you. Also, you're going to be bound by what your library policies say or what your school policies say. And we acknowledge that. So, one of the things we're going to come back to more, time and time again is, what does your policy say? If you don't have a collection management policy, and your school should have one too, if they don't have a materials policy, what they're adding to their curriculum / library, we can help you come up with that. We can come up with some samples and then get your board to look at it and approve it, because those policies are going to be your guiding light, your guidelines for what you are going to select for your library. And we're also going to talk about the differences between selection and censorship, and where that line can get fuzzy.
Yes.
Okay.
Ask questions anytime, type it in the chat or just pipe up. We're here for you. And if you've always know that if you'd like to ask a question anonymously, you can direct message Mary Beth, Patty, or me.
Okay. Self-censorship. I'm going to start off with a couple poll questions. I actually have almost 20 poll questions. We'll see how many we get to. And they're more to just kind of get you thinking about censorship and self-censorship. That's really hard for me to say. I'm starting to have a lisp a little bit. Okay. So here is our first poll. Has your library ever not purchased material because a review or publisher's catalog indicated that it was for mature readers, had explicit content, or might be controversial? I'll give you about a minute, so about 30 more seconds to answer this one. All right, we're starting to slow down with the answers. About 15 more seconds. All right, I'm going to close that poll. We had about just over half, 65% answered. So here are the results. More said no than yes, and that's great. That's very good. All right, and I'm going to do, well, let's just start with that. So self-censorship. Can you see my PowerPoint?
No.
Okay. There we go. How about now?
Yes.
All right, excellent. Self-censorship, how you select books in your library and how they're displayed and how they're made available for your patrons. We're going to look at that today. So, of course, censorship is very closely tied into not only the American Library Association Reader's Bill of Rights, but also the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment. First Amendment is, of course, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press. And, the American Library Association ties closely in that, and freedom to access information. So this is very much considering those access issues for your patrons, but also, on a national level, how are we meeting that U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights? One of the 10 amendments to the Library Bill of Rights gives everyone residing the right to hear all sides of every issue and to make their own judgments about these issues, about government interference or limitations. I'm sorry, that should be the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Allows for individuals to speak, publish, read, and view what they wish, worship or not to worship as they wish, associate with whomever they choose, and gather together to ask the government to make changes in the law or to correct the wrongs in society.
And that's been upheld by the Supreme Court in many different ways, to include censoring books in school libraries and public libraries. So,
this is kind of my guideline when, and it kind of makes me feel really proud that our jobs is making sure that people have First Amendment rights. And I think that's just awesome. It makes me really proud that I'm able to help people get the information they need for the topics that they care about. Whether it's, whatever it is, whatever information they care about, I can help them find that information. And I don't know about you, but that makes me really proud that's how I'm giving back to society. And that's how I'm making this world a better place.
It's lovely.
Okay, I want to talk about what self-censorship is first, and then we'll do a few more polls, and then we'll go from there. Self-censorship or silent censorship is those choices to not purchase materials or weed ones because of fear of challenge or fear of controversy. And instead of letting the process that your libraries have in place for reconsideration of materials, staff are making choices on behalf of everybody because they are not making that information available. And that's why your policies for collection management are so vital, because you can follow those criteria that's set out in your collection management policy and see if it fits it. There might be controversial stuff that doesn't fit your collection policy. You didn't add that book to the collection because it was controversial. You didn't add it because it didn't meet your collection needs, your standards that you're set up by your library board or your school.
I think a word that you're going to see a lot when we talk about self-censorship or silent censorship is fear. We can be motivated to do that because we're afraid of reprisal. We're afraid of getting fired. We're afraid of a book being challenged. And that fear is a very strong human response to a very real threat or danger. And that's why we always say your policies are so important. I say all the time that policies are like the safety net that holds staff, that keeps staff safe, because staff is often like the high wire. They're walking on a high wire or a tightrope, and the slightest thing can push you off, but that safety net keeps you safe. And that's one of the most important jobs boards can have, is that they can keep their staff safe through policies. An internal challenge is when it might not necessarily be library management, it might be school management or administration, requests to reconsider currently available items without following the policy. And what we're seeing in Kansas with schools that are experiencing challenges is that that's the thing that's happening, that the administration is not following that. Something's going on.
That was
not following the policy that's in place. And the easiest reason for that is because administration doesn't know that policy exists. Some of the school policies that we've taken a good look at are decades old. And so they needed to be touched up, and they needed to be passed and reviewed and updated by the school board. Your library board should also go through your policies. They say every policy every year, but a more realistic goal is to take a third of the policies every year. So every 3 years, your collection management policy should have a good scrutinized look by the director and the board to make sure that it's up to date.
And that look doesn't mean that there's going to be changes made, but it's just a review. It'll keep that information current with your board, so they're aware of it, and then also with you, so that you and your staff, if you have them, are aware of those policies. It keeps kind of at the forefront of your mind.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to launch another question. I have a whole list of them, and I'm just going to pick the ones that strike me in the moment.
Oh, yeah.
So here is one. Has your library ever not purchased, I apologize for the spelling mistake, magazines, videos, popular music, or books because they are so popular they might get stolen? I think one thing you're going to notice with these poll questions is the reason why a book is not added, or item is not added to your collection, is very important. that reason why. And this is also what we say with weeding. The reason why that book is pulled is also very important. And that should be, that's the framework.
Right. We don't weed willy-nilly. It may look like it, but we do consider every book that we look at. And especially when we're weeding with you, we'll bring you in and discuss why should this book go or why should it stay.
It looks like everybody's answered it's going to. We have about 77% participated, so that's good. You will see that, oh, wonderful, 86% said no. And I think that reason why, I bet there's lots of people here that could say, well, we didn't select this popular music to add to the collection because our library doesn't add music. That's a legitimate reason. You're not adding any music. And so, you're not selecting some over others. It's not added to collection. I know also some libraries on their movie video collection, they have a very strict parameter what they add. Maybe they only add nonfiction instructional videos or whatever to their collection. So anything else would not be added. All the featured films and stuff that are in movie theaters would not be added to the collection. And again, that's going to be set up in your policy. All right, I'm going to do another one. We're going to do.
We did not make the questions up. They came from good library friends in New York.
Yes, and I will share the list of questions as a whole and the handouts after today.
Has your library ever restricted access to magazines and removed it from the collection?
Or potentially controversial content, language, or illustration. Think about Sports Illustrated. I think that's what this one's directed toward. This is the one it reminds me of.
Yep. And I like it that it says, has your library ever? Because I did not, but I was working in a library that did.
All
Oh,
right.
Mad Magazine, says Patty.
Mad Magazine. I'm sure there's many.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah, there's a whole bunch in there. All right. I think we've had most people answer. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. Here you can see of the 18 people that answered, 61% said no and 39% said yes. All right. So did I skip one? I may have skipped one. Yes.
Yeah.
Talk
So-
about, yeah.
Quiet censorship is another kind of soft censorship or self-censorship or silent censorship. They're all terms that are used interchangeably. And it's when materials are removed, limited, or never purchased at all, despite being a title that would serve a community. And this might be something as innocuous as what's happening to my body if you're in a school library or even a public library. Limited means that the patron might have to jump through hoops to borrow that item. That's just an example there of what that can look like.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Now we're ready for the next slide. It is important, of course, to remember that there are differences between school and public libraries because, of course, schools do act in parentis locus, means that they do act in a parental facility with their students, with those children in their care.
Yes.
And public libraries do not have that charge. But the one thing that they do have in common, and we'll come back again, is that both should have policies that guide their selection process.
Sorry, I'm digging through here. Found it.
You can remind me to stop sharing the poll results. I forget to click that button and then I just move on. So let's do a couple more shares.
There we go.
All right. Has your library ever prohibited use of meeting room or bulletin board use to groups whose views you disagreed with, or you disagreed with, or your staff disagreed with? And we're going to give you some time on this. And I did set up this poll to be anonymous, and so don't worry, I can't tell who said what. So don't worry about that. We just want to get kind of a feel of the more pressing issues, if there are any, are the ones that we need to address a little more in depth about why this could be problematic for your library. The other thing to consider is the reason we're bringing these up is because if any of these happen and a person decides to sue the library because of restricted access, the ACLU or one of those big, entities that fight for people's rights could come after the library. So this is why we want to make sure that you're aware of some of these problematic, sticky situations so that you can make sure that your library has the policy foundation that it needs to make the right decisions and to protect the library.
Yes.
Okay.
If your library has a meeting room, you're definitely going to need a meeting room use policy.
And I think if you don't have a meeting room, you should have something in the policy that states that the library does not have a meeting room, but maybe you do allow groups to meet at the big table in the center of the room or something. So if you do allow outside groups of any sort, whether you have a separate room for them or not, you should have a policy that states who can use that space and
how it can be used.
Because a lot of meeting room policies or public use policies state about it being open to the public, or you can't have, I'm gonna say marketing, but like if somebody goes in to like sell something, that would be against the policy. And I'm not thinking of the right phraseology there, but.
If you don't have a policy, we've got several examples here that we can send to you in a Word document. So you don't have to start from scratch and your board doesn't. You can take the document examples that we've got and customize them to your library, and there you go. We always try to make it easy for you. So there are different kinds and different forms of self-censorship. I'm going to come back to labels. The secret shelving location or the secret method is one that we've talked about a lot internally here. That may be where you keep the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue back behind the desk, or that's where you keep the What's Happening to My Body books back behind the desk because they keep disappearing.
So I did put up another poll that kind of ties in with what Gail was saying. Has your library ever set policies based on video or music producers' ratings to restrict access, even though local ordinances don't prohibit use by minors? And I think the wording on this is very key.
It's crucial. Sometimes, and especially in your copybook sized art books, you might have a patron with conservative views who takes a permanent marker and draws underwear on all of the nude statues, or in The Night Kitchen by Maurice Sendak. They might draw underwear on the little, I think his name is Mickey, isn't it, Patty? On the little naked Mickey boy.
Yes, his name is Mickey. I believe Diana's going after that copy that I have.
So she can share.
At the office.
Right. One of the easiest ways to censor is through labels, and those would be labels that you would put on the book, on the spine, things like that. So very good. We do have some that have restricted use. Okay, so that gives us an opportunity to talk about that.
So what we want to remind you of, and we've said several times, that the MPAA ratings and the music producers ratings, which is something different, I can't remember, and also video game ratings, those are proprietary, which means that it's a business that does them and creates those ratings. They are not government sanctioned, or maybe that's not the right word, but it's not a government entity that's doing that. It is a separate proprietary business that makes those. They're also copyrighted. So there's two issues going on. Is one, that it's a private company that's making those rating decisions, but also use of them without written permission by that company is copyright violation.
Yes, and you may have it in your circulation policy that juveniles can't check out movies, or juveniles can't check out R-rated movies. And that actually is a form of censorship. We do have better ways to word things, and And I'll say right away, this is one of the ways in which your personal ethics and your professional ethics, or the ethics of our profession, are going to collide. This is going to be one of those things. As the librarian and as the library board, it is not your place to determine what a child or a minor may or may not read or view. That is solely the parents' or guardian's responsibility. It might be difficult for you to say, or it might be easy for you to say, golly, I don't think your mom would want you to watch that, but that's not our place. Remember, we don't serve in parentis locus.
As a public library.
As a public library, we don't. And so that's why Mary Beth talked about it. It may be the policy of the library to just purchase nonfiction things, movies, and that way there's no problem about it.
Gail,
Yes.
what if the library offered an opt-in or an opt-out for the parent to decide for their children? Could they do that with the library account? So it says, parent is opted in for X.
Yes, I understand what you're saying. It kind of gets around it in a way, but again, that's making that library worker responsible for the parent. What if the library worker is really busy? It says right up there in the patron notes on the staff side, not in the patron notes public side, it says, do not check out R-rated DVDs to this juvenile patron as per their parent. So you're really busy and you're just scanning away, checking out, and one goes out the door and an irate parent comes in. You may not think that that would happen, but it could happen. And so that's where the freedom to read and the freedom to view need to be part of that collection development policy, or part of that patron and circulation policy, because the library staff ultimately can't be responsible for that. It's too much of a burden, really, and leaving and putting it in the policy that it's up to the discretion of the librarian is far worse, because that just opens up the librarian to a lawsuit. Now, labels can be, you can have, your spine label on a movie, you just don't use the movie rating on it. You can also shelve them separately, but in a way that is subtle censorship. A way a lot of librarians get around that is they put movies that would be acceptable for children in the children's section, and movies that they would deem acceptable for non-children into the adult section. That makes it a little bit difficult when you're shelving. We've got a question, and it's, what if it's the board that wants to censor R-rated materials for minors and you can't convince them otherwise? Definitely give us a call. We have some material that they need to read. I'm sure that you've explained it to them, but they need to understand that when you become a board member, one of the things you have to do is be able to stand up for the freedom to read and freedom to view of all patrons. That's very important. Often you get into a situation like that with this board where they come from a school background and they're used to protecting children, and they need to understand that public libraries are different than schools. We operate differently, and that this is just not something that we do in public libraries. We've got a lot of different material that we can share with you if you're the library that would like help with this, and we can come and talk to them as well. Ultimately, we can't tell the board what to do, but we can explain to them that they're coming at it from the wrong angle, and we can share materials with them that hopefully will be able to change their mind.
And one of the things that we do is we try to provide as much information as possible. And we are willing, of course, to debate the issue and discuss it, because that's how you make an educated decision, is you look at the question at hand and you find the information available, and you make your informed decision from the information that you have available.
Right.
So and that's what this is. That's what this discussion is for, is to look at the situation at hand. what are the pros and cons? What are the legal obligations? What are the social obligations? And where is that line? How do we protect First Amendment rights, but also how do we meet the needs of our community? And it can be a hard line to walk. And
if you weren't watching who the parties were that testified in opposition of the proposed Parental Bill of Rights, which was the censorship in schools, the ACLU was there. It takes one call to the ACLU and they bring the hammer down, because when you're not allowing minors to borrow R-rated materials, you're violating their First Amendment rights. There are ways to make it difficult for this to happen for the children, but just out and out saying no is a violation of their First Amendment rights.
And well, I was gonna say something. Nope, it's gone. Well, if it comes back,
I know. And also, this is a hardcore area for me where personal ethics and professional ethics will collide.
Mhm.
My juveniles were not allowed to check out R-rated materials from the library, but I was their parent and I was with them when they went to the library. If they went alone, they knew what our family's expectations were, and they stuck within those expectations. And if they didn't, we had a family talk and the item went back, or we watched it with the parents right there.
When it's the board that wants to restrict the materials and not the librarian, does this still put the librarian at risk of lawsuit? So make sure again that what you are following is in policy. That's going to at least strengthen it. But it could put the library itself at risk of lawsuit if it is deemed unconstitutional or illegal. So that's why we're here to help vet some of those policies, because while we all think, well, I'm a small library, nobody's going to call the ACLU on me, or, it's not going to happen here. If it did, where there is a possibility, if it did, the consequences, I think, would be more severe on a small library, because it could devastate the library itself. If it
the library would definitely not be able to afford a lawsuit of that magnitude.
Right, because they don't, you don't have the money for a lawsuit or a lawyer and all that. So that's why we want to be as careful as we can be, and move with caution and gather as much information as we can. So.
And I would say to the librarian, and Crystal, I'm not assuming it's you, I'm just assuming you're asking questions. I would also say to the librarian that keep at it. A drip of water at a regular interval can destroy almost anything.
And
just
and
slowly, slowly.
And it may be offering alternative wording so that it, so that it falls within constitutional parameters and legal parameters, but it still suits the need if you can. There's ways to word these policies to suit that need that is there. Okay.
Give us a quiz.
Oh, and I had a question. Are CKLS staff supposed to answer? Well, of course, if you can.
Oh my
Have
goodness.
library
yes.
experience, please. Yes. I'm sorry I didn't say that at first. Oh, I had one ready, I think. Have I done this one yet? I don't think so. Has your library ever responded to a challenge and removed the challenge material without going through a formal reconsideration of materials process? And while you're filling out this poll, I will share a little story that I know that happened in my library. People would complain about a book, and we were lucky enough to have other branches. So, well, you complain about it at this library. Well, it just went to another library, so you don't see it anymore. And it was like a non-controversial way to just, it felt like, okay, now we don't have to deal with the issue because they don't see it, out of sight, out of mind. But I think it does cross over to line for censorship, because now the other people in that community couldn't see that book. And one of the books that it wasn't formally challenged, but I'll call it challenged, was a picture book where it was, the kid was playing in the bathroom or something, and the mom had hung her bras up on the curtain rod to dry, and the parent didn't like that you could see bras in the illustration. So that was it. We just decided, well, that's going to a different library.
Yeah.
All right. Share results. Again, 83% said no. 17%
Now-
said yes.
I would ask, if a patron comes in and says, this book doesn't belong in the library, just as simple as that, and they kind of slam it down a little bit. And then that's all that they do. And then they go away and they get different books and they go home and they're happy with their books. Should you report that interaction? And the ALA Office of Intellectual Freedom would actually say yes, because in a way that's a challenge. And so you would go to their website and give it a quick report. They track these things and they publish them to us so that we can look at that publication and see, oh, what might create problems for us in the future if we've got this item in our collection now. And they'll say what state it is. And of course, different regions and different states and different towns all have different standards for what they consider acceptable and what they don't.
And when you report like that, maybe you can start to see a trend and know if there's, something that a movement that you need to be aware of, just to be prepared. Patty, you say you have a question in the chat?
Yes, this came privately to me. What about materials that are considered by many people to hold outdated or bigoted views or images? For instance, the recent discussion over Dr. Seuss's imagery in some books, or on a much more extreme level, something like Birth of a Nation.
Are you well enough to answer, Miss Patty?
I will address Dr. Seuss, and then and I'll also address Little House on the Prairie, because those are the two hidden questions to me in that situation. In both those cases, more so for Little House on the Prairie, we're writing from a time period. For things like Mark Twain, Laura Ingalls Wilder, we're writing from a time and we're creating a picture of the time. So the contention from the side that wants it removed is there are images of people. There may be words or language used that's not appropriate in our modern politically correct day. And so they want them gone based on that. The critics that are in favor of are looking at, these were written at a time period. There is an opportunity for some historical learning about that time period. And so when I go to your libraries and I put things on the list, I give you the choices, do you want to get rid of these items? But I'm going to give you the defense on both sides before we consider weeding those items. And I'm going to be very specific and share with you what the issue at hand is, because it's that baby with the bathwater. Do we throw out all Dr. Seuss because of an image in one or two books? Or do we throw out all of Laura Ingalls Wilder because of a description of a Native American or of a person of African-American descent based on a situation? And the importance is that historical perspective. The issue about Dr. Seuss is the illustrated portrayal. Again, they were written in the 1950s and 60s. So we do have 50 and 60 years ago where it may be right or may be wrong that those depictions were created. But the decision is making the decision based on the item in front of you and not looking at an author or a collection based on a single item. And that's difficult because as librarians, single librarians with large collections, that's a lot of work. And if ever you run across something like that, the call is to one of us, because if we haven't already seen it, we're gonna bring it in, we're gonna examine it and help you go through that process.
Yes. Yes. I think that's a very difficult thing, because those books still have a great deal of merit. And there's a great deal to learn from them. If children are reading the book and you're the adult in your life, it's a great opportunity to have a discussion about how people were treated, what people were called, and why we don't do that anymore. On the banned book list this year has been To Kill a Mockingbird, which is also almost always the #1 book voted as their favorite book by librarians. And so it has a great deal of literary merit as a whole work, not just as an isolated incident.
I was going to add to that I think a key point to take away from all this book challenges talk is that there should be a process in place to evaluate the material questioned. And if you go through that process, it may or may not be removed from the shelves, but at least it was given due process. The book or the item was evaluated. It was looked at critically. It was thought about. So it wasn't a reactionary response. It wasn't just, ooh, this, somebody got upset and we just took it. It's a thoughtful, considered response, and due process was followed. Your policies were followed, and a decision was made. And to me, that's the democratic process right there. That's people looking at it thoughtfully and considering it from all the angles that they have, all the information they have available about that material. And I think that's very important.
I do too, I agree. Jan Benjamin from Clifton Clyde said in the past, Clifton Clyde has had teachers object to books and they have been removed. A total of 2 books over 15 years. Christy asked, were the books removed after the reconsideration process or by the administrator? And Jan reports, no, the para at the time pulled the book because the teacher would have harassed her. It made her life easier. Christy said, in my case, I've had a teacher or administrator hide the book or magazine until the end of the school year.
And I think we need to acknowledge that, yes, sometimes you have, for your health, for yourself, you don't have that. I'm going to call it a fight. I don't know if that's the best word. You don't have that in you. And for yourself, you need to diffuse the situation, and that happens. And I can understand it. I'm not going to say if it's right or wrong. I can understand that. We're all human.
Judging.
We have to know which battles we can face and, what we can do for our community, but also for ourselves, because you can't be the best librarian to your community if you've run yourself ragged. Or fights you don't have.
Cowering in fear every time someone walks in. I remember one of the very first school libraries we weeded, there was a special room in the back and there were a whole bunch of really amazing books there. But the building principal had said, I don't want these books available to children. And so they're going to be right here. They were wonderful books. And most of us would look at those books and wouldn't find anything wrong with them. But that was a values judgment by the principal. The paraprofessional knew that that wasn't the right thing. But had they spoken up, they would have lost their job. And that they weren't in a position to push that issue.
I did find that once we had a policy in place, it was a lot easier to say, well, hey, we've got this policy, let's go through it first. But part of that was because we were both a public and a school library.
Right.
Administrators still sometimes step in and do those things. But once I had a policy behind what I was trying to tell them, it was a lot easier to stand up and make my voice heard. I wasn't as scared to do it because I knew I'd have a process, and if they take it off, then it's not my fault, it's theirs. So
right. And I think that tucks on the whole crux of the matter there, is that policy helps you educate people in the future, be it your board or a teacher or a building professional or a concerned citizen. And it just really does empower you to be more confident in the work that you're doing. And I would also say that you know, every year a new person, an old person leaves the board and a new one comes on. When you're doing your new board member training, this is a great opportunity to talk about things like censorship and why we shouldn't do this and why we should. And if you do that over the course of several years, you're going to have a majority who understand why we allow children to check out R-rated movies. Ooh, Liz had a subversive teacher. All the banned books were in her closet. Did she let you borrow them from the closet? Yes, Liz is shaking her head up and down. Yes. Great.
This is Patty. I was the assistant director and head of children's services at my last library when one board member came in, probably on her third or fourth month, was a very conservative mom, and on her third or fourth month made a proposal to require an ID for any library user to check out a movie that was PG-13 or higher. And that was PG-13 movies, another one at rated R movies. And our school district provided a middle school ID, but did not have anything with an age on it. And she worked really hard with the school district to get what she wanted because she felt that this was so important. However, she had chosen not to send her child to public school, and that meant a contention with her school district. Eventually, she won our board over, and they came to accept a middle school ID would count for checking out of a PG-13 movie, but you had to show an official driver's license or ID with an age on it to check out a PG-7 or an R-rated movie. Did I fight this? As long as I could, yes.
Yeah. Yep, this is, like I said, that this is where your new trustee training that you offer to them as the library director is so crucial. This is also why you visit with your mayor and your city council about what qualities you're looking for in a new library board member, if you have the luxury of doing so. Most of us take the first living, breathing body we can get. But ideally, there should be no board member on the board who cannot support the Library Bill of Rights, freedom to read and freedom to view. That's the ideal world. But this is take this opportunity now before you've got new board members coming on to explain to them why that's important. And I would not say the ALA Library Bill of Rights or the ALA freedom to read. Most people do view ALA as a very liberal and I'll just say a very liberal, politically liberal organization, which sometimes doesn't fly in a more conservative community. But those are basic tenets that we go by. And the Bill of Rights is particularly a good one to talk about if you just look at the dates when amendments were added and when it was enacted. Those are all tied to key historical events throughout history where different individuals or organizations tried to suppress others, especially through freedom of speech. It's very, very good document. They won't have had an idea that even such a document existed or why it's so important. And your first time, it may be deaf ears, but keep plugging away because that's the way to get it done.
I'm going to do another poll.
Yes, please.
Has your library ever not purchased materials concerning minorities because no one in our community is like that?
I think I've worked in some really weird places. I have worked in a special general library. It was an Air Force library, a lot like a community school library. We actually had a list of things we weren't allowed to purchase for our collection, like is it phrenology? That's the study of bumps on the skull, and no books on magic tricks, just all kinds of things that we couldn't use federal dollars to purchase. But we gladly accepted donations of those items.
Did you have to track where it came from then really well? Because if somebody came in and said, how did you get this magic book in here? So you had to put it like in the record where.
Well, I have a story on weeding the collection, because it was government property. Anything added, oh, very good, was government property. And so when we weeded it, we had to go through a distinct process. We couldn't put it in recycle. It had to go to a place called DRMO. And it's like Defense Reutilization Management Organization, if I remember correctly, DRMO. But I had studied Russian, and DRMO means something very naughty in Russian. So with every box that I would write it on, I would chuckle to myself. So they would all go to DRMO, and then they would be sold as a lot, and nobody knew what they were going to get. But that's how we had to dispose of them.
So I was going to make a comment on this question. I know I came from a very small community. I think a town of 200 is where it's at now. I think it was smaller when I lived there. Very homogenous group. Everybody was the same. But what we also knew is that those kids had family members that were maybe, of a minority, maybe a mixed race or a different race, or different sexual orientation, different religion. And so even if your community may be very homogenous, those community members have connections, ties to all sorts of people all across the nation and all across the world. And so I think as we've learned from the pandemic, we're not as walled off and separate from anybody else as we thought we were. This is a very interconnected world. And everyone deserves to see representation, not only of themselves, but the people they love in a library collection. And I think it's very, very important to always keep that in mind. Okay, let's try another one. Oh, let's do this one. Has your library ever, we kind of talked about this one. Has your library ever not purchased material because of the origin, background, or views of the author?
That's an interesting one, and it brings to mind an alternative history author that was popular 2 decades ago. Sorry, I'm showing my age again. And it wasn't so much that we shouldn't have purchased it, but that it needed a disclaimer in it, because it wasn't, the publisher had not claimed that it was alternate history. The publisher had claimed that it was factual history. And so we had to download a document from the publisher's website and paste it in on the front page. And then we had to recatalog it based on this new information.
I was thinking of Bill Cosby and his, what is Little Bill books. I mean, they've been weeded because, they're outdated and they're no longer connecting to your community. But I mean, when I see those books, all I can think of is Bill Cosby and the allegations are, against him. So, there's always that too, where a well-liked author, something happens and there's new information about them. Does that now mean that their artwork, which is a book, their creative work is now, not have a place on the shelf?
And then what happens if it comes back years later that they are exonerated?
But again, go, when in question, go and look at your weeding policies, go look at your selection policies. There was, remember the anti-vax for Jenny McCarthy and all the stuff like that. The reason it got weeded off the shelves was not because of the controversy of the viewpoints there, but because it's medical or health information, and our guidelines are for weeding is that medical and health information should not be older than 5 years.
Right.
And that was the criteria for why those books were no longer put on the shelf. Was it hard for me to see information that I felt was harmful? Yes. But I also knew that I needed to follow the policies that were lined up that were guiding my selection
Sure, of
choices.
representing both sides of an issue.
And Mary Beth, that brings up a really good point, because when we were going in and having to have the conversation about Jenny McCarthy, that book was brand new, but it had already been substantiated as incorrect. And so your libraries have just spent $26 on something that we're coming in and telling you, we're sorry, but because it refutes medical fact, we're asking you to remove something that you've just spent $26 of your hard-earned money on.
Mhm.
So understand that when we go to help you weed and help you make those decisions, or we make these comments about, oh, we found this information out, we don't do it because it's joyful to us. We understand the work that's gone into collecting those items. Mary Beth mentioned Bill Cosby. At the time the O.J. Simpson trial was going on, the O.J. Simpson books in my collection were flying off the shelves. I did not have the not being used and not being read because the information that was in those books was actually fact. He was a great ball player.
Yes.
And so, now we're muddying it on this trial, but why is it popular now? People are reading it because they want to know the stuff that they didn't know, and it became popular. So I didn't have that as the reason to remove the items. Now they're out of date, and but the information in the book is still true.
One of the things that I wonder is, we've first off, I know we have very excellent librarians throughout the whole system. I know that. I've been in your libraries and I know what you see and do every day and what you purchase and things like that. We're having really good responses to these by and large, where most of us haven't experienced that. One of the questions that I have for all of you is, do you think you haven't experienced it because of your training, or because you don't have money to make lots of choices on things that may or may not be controversial? We always say, can you think of 5 people who might want to read it? And if you have a limited budget, that might be your first priority, other than, providing political information on both sides that is going to go out of date really quickly. That's something I'd be interested to hear what you all have to say. I guess not. That's okay. Nope. Barb at Formosa says budget is what drives what is purchased. And that's what I suspected.
I mean, that's a legitimate selection criteria. Is this the best use of library funds?
Right. And as Jan Benjamin said, I've tried to increase our books on other cultures, fiction and nonfiction, and basically they aren't read. That's one of the hardest things as a librarian, is when you're purchasing what would really help balance your collection, and then it just sits there. Crystal said, what my patrons ask for is what I put on my order list.
There is, I would say, I think Chris had her hand up.
I usually tried to get more than just 5 people that would read it. Like if somebody put it on our list that they wanted it, I usually tried to see if I could come up with anywhere from 5 to 10 people that would read it before I'd buy it. That way we were covered for sure.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Cheryl.
I feel that it's, our book budgets are such that I'm looking very carefully at the books I'm buying, because I'm buying for, my little ones, then older children, junior high. I'm buying large print for, people that need the large print. You're buying for fiction and nonfiction, and we all want to get the most bang for our bucks that will be checked out, not just once, Because
Mhm.
maybe if we don't have that book that one person that wants to read it, we can borrow it from another library. And so, you know, you get to know your patrons.
Yes.
Not that I haven't gone off that rail a time or two, but you know, we all have limited funds in our libraries, you know, to put towards our book budgets. And, you know, we need to spend it wisely. And that's what I try to do every time, and, you know, get something new for all my readers.
Yep, Anita said it really well, and she's in a school library in La Crosse. She said, I want to be more diverse, but when spending money, I want it to be checked out and not sitting on the shelf gathering dust. And Michael reminds us that Pathfinder, interlibrary loan, and then of course, Share It are great ways to get more diverse titles if you don't have the funds for those. And Liz asked if you look at Amazon or Goodreads reviews when you make selections. I would also remind you, if you use Ingram purchases the reviews from all of the big reviewers like Book List and Hornbook and School Library Journal. And those reviews are right in with every item there, and you can look at those. I think you'll find your favorites, which kind of speak to you and your library, or you and your students or patrons, but those reviews are right in there as well. We've made it to 2:30. Wow.
As I say, we are at 2:30. Please don't hesitate to put any more questions that you have in there. Jan does add, yes, all kinds of reviews, Amazon, Book Talk, Ingram, other publishers, and request it on ILL and scan it and look it through. Those are all very good practices. I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. We are happy to continue this conversation. If you would like more workshops, let us know. If you just want more of a private conversation or us to come to board and work with you, let us know. We also have some sample policies, both for selection, weeding, and then also for reconsideration. We have reconsideration forms and the procedures for that we can help you with, because there's no reason for you to reinvent the wheel. We can give you a starting point, and then you can customize it for your library. So if you need those, send me an email and I can send you samples as well.
Before we go, Krista said she has a list from a patron of children's books that have sexually explicit content. And those lists are available all over the place. And those are very good lists that a parent might use if they decide that's what they want their child to read or not. And Jan said, I would like a generic collection development guide based on schools. Jan, we will get that to you as soon as we can.
Yep. That's a very awesome request.
This is Patty. In response to that comment about the list from the patron, right now there are lots of those lists going around, and I have a couple books sitting right next to me that made it to one of those lists about sexual content. But for example, the book that I'm holding up called The Bridge by Bill Koenigsberg doesn't have sexual content in it. Just made the list because somebody was looking for things that they were unhappy about. And this was one of those titles that was challenged or currently being brought up for teens. There's no sexual content in it. There's actually one cuss word in it. And so sometimes things are making the list that aren't actually even being vetted by the person passing the list around.
Movie lists exist as well. Go ahead and unmute. We can't hear you, dear.
I think maybe your headset is muted. Sometimes that happens. Still can't hear you.
That always happens to me.
Yeah, it's that darn headset mutes for you. No, we still can't hear you.
Rats.
Okay, so I think maybe Crystal's, yes, call us later, Crystal. Yes, we definitely want to hear from you.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes. All right, I will, this session has been recorded and I will post that in with the archives. I will also have the poll questions where I got those questions from, the whole list there as well. And we'll also have a few other handouts for you. So thank you for joining us today. Don't forget that we have the Explorers group on Thursday and that the big spring fling is
Yes.
coming up soon.
You'll be
So,
getting your packets in the mail soon. We've got a busy printing and packaging day coming up this week.
Yep.
Hi,
And so yeah,
friends.